Welcome back to Questions from the Waiting Room. As a recap, this is going to be questions that patients have emailed to us that they might be too afraid to ask their psychiatrist. Question number 1 is pretty good. Raina T. from Iowa City, Iowa, wants to know, can you tell when a patient is lying to you?
Yes, there's a few different ways. And the one that may be debunked is when patients might lie, they may look up and to their right. And the idea there is that the right side of the brain's more for like creativity, like they're creating it, manufacturing an answer, rather than up and to the left where it's more logical and like truth telling. So I've observed this in myself when people are asking me questions like outside of work. If you're having to think about how you might answer versus opposed to just answering the question. So it's loosely helpful. More helpful from that probably is if a patient answers too quickly, like super quickly. That's kind of an indication that maybe it's not an authentic answer. I don't know why that is exactly. And some of this is like the neuro-linguistic processing stuff where people do things with their bodies that tell you what they really mean. Like, for example, if a patient leans back in the couch while I'm talking to them about a subject, either they're disengaging from me, like they're not buying into what I'm talking about or telling them, or they're maybe becoming defensive a little bit. It doesn't always tell, obviously, exactly what they're thinking, but I might question it. Like, if I'm like, hey, I think we should start this medication X, and they lean back like this and kind of after leaning forward and being engaged, then I know that there's a gulf or a divide between us. And so I'll ask them, I'm like, oh, sounds like you don't like that idea, or do you not like that idea? I'll ask them that. And then they'll say something like, oh, I didn't know you were actually going to recommend that or a medication, or, oh, my friend took that and he had a suicide attempt. I heard that causes suicidal thinking. You know what I'm saying? So that's like the body language stuff. But lying, going back to the original question, if somebody also hesitates in answering, sometimes they're lying or telling you part of it, or part of the answer, or they're just simply hesitant to tell you all the things, So it's kind of interesting. Anything else about that? If there's inconsistencies in someone's story, as psychiatrists, we're kind of mechanics for the brain. And when I'm listening to someone's brain talk to me, if there's inconsistencies in the story or their past treatment and it doesn't make sense, then I sometimes wonder, like, what is the gain for them to do that? And then we'll talk about that. And a lot of times, once I'm onto that dynamic and we open it up and I figure out like what they're concealing, it's usually because they don't want to be judged, or they've had like bad interactions with other clinicians and they're afraid to really open up. So, okay. Yeah.
All right. I think that's my favorite question. So, okay. Let's see. Serenity P from Fort Worth, Texas. Besides being able to get prescription medications, what are the benefits of seeing a psychiatrist over a psychologist?
Well, a psychiatrist, because we're medically trained, that's a really good question. Our medical training doesn't just begin in medical school. It goes way back to undergraduate, like in college. So for myself, I had to take pre-medical classes, which is a year of organic chemistry lectures and a year of organic chemistry laboratory, a year of chemistry, a year of chemistry lab, like physical chemistry, a year of physics, a year of physics laboratory, a year of biology, and there's usually some field biology lab associated with that, often biochemistry, And, you take English, you learn how to write and all the other things. So that's like a very heavy load in college when you're right out of high school. And not only that, you have not only just taking the courses, you have to succeed in them and earn basically A or B plus in all those courses. So it's a lot. So you start off with like a scientific method and scientific mindedness, going into medical school, of course. And then in medical school, that's another 4 years of all science. And you learn, you learn about all the medical things that can go wrong that can lead to psychiatric issues. For example, I'll have some patients come to me that have been doing therapy, and they didn't know that they had rock bottom vitamin D, which can cause some depressive symptoms, or low vitamin B12, or they didn't know that they were anemic when you have low red blood cells, or no one screened them for substance use issues and discussed the harmful effects of the substances they were using. And I don't mean like I'm sure in therapy people talk about, hey, I went and drank too much the other night. Well, what I would ask is like, well, how much was too much? Like, what did you drink? Who made the drinks? Were they standard drinks like singles, or were they doubles or triples? Were you at the boot and they had some special? It kind of gives you a portal into the person's life. So the medical lens on a case is really important. And some people who don't get well in therapy actually have a medical problem or a substance use problem that really wasn't picked up yet. So that is one reason why I think seeing a psychiatrist above just like a typical therapist would be indicated. Trying to think of the other obvious reasons for that. Another reason is diagnostically, because I'm using medications and I'm putting those in someone's body to affect their brain. We really need to get the diagnosis done correctly. And in psychiatry and psychology, there's something called idioms of distress. For example, some people tell me, well, I was manic the other day. And they're misusing the word manic. They're not using it in a clinical sense. They're just using it euphemistically, like I was acting crazy or I was actually anxious. So if this person told a doctor they were manic to doctors mean bipolar disorder. But if they say that they were manic and it really means that they were anxious, then we would use a totally different medication class for that. Okay. And so we get really good at diagnosing properly. And I think in therapy, sometimes that diagnostic phase can be delayed or extended over many sessions. Whereas with me, my first 90 minutes with me is not a typical therapy session. It's like a very engaged, thorough review of their current symptoms, their symptom history, which medications they take, what substances they use, what's the history of present illness, like why are they seeing me now? Why aren't they seeing me 2 years ago? Like what happened a month ago that led them to schedule the appointment for today? So all that stuff kind of unfolds. So we really have to be precise about that, because if you give the person the wrong medication, it's not going to fix their problem, and that can be malpractice. And that's the bad thing to have happen. And then on top of that, I think seeing a psychiatrist, sometimes, we were able to tell and telegraph where the treatment could go. Like I've had patients do therapy for 20 years, let's say, and they come in and they don't know all the tools that I have to get them all the way well. For example, I had somebody who did like a decade of psychoanalysis. And I love psychoanalysis. I think it's a great tool. But this person had ADHD, and through all the psychoanalysis and all their like trouble in life and not completing school and all that stuff, when they saw me and I was doing my typical 90-minute routine with them, they had all this inattentiveness for years, and I screened them for ADHD and then diagnosed them with ADHD and then treated them. And I knew that was going to help them shore up these loose ends to help them get better. And what happened in this case is this person went back and finished college and then got a master's, and and it was a master's in a foreign language, which was really cool. And then this person went and lived abroad for a time and learned and used the language that they learned. So it was super cool. And so I like to think that if folks come to see us here, I get to interview them like patients, that we can accelerate them getting better by being so detail oriented. So it's a long answer for you.
I think it was very well said.
Okay, thank you. I'm working on it.
Well, how about this one? Are psychedelics like LSD now being used to treat patients with depression?
The answer is not yet.
Okay.
They're doing research on psilocybin, which is a psychedelic, but it's not LSD. LSD is a different compound, and the psychedelics as a class of medications, if they were going to be used as medications, need to be FDA approved. So when the FDA approves that class of medication, then there'll probably be a few products on the market at some point. And the idea there is that the medications we currently use for depression, or treatments like electroconvulsive therapy or transcranial magnetic stimulation or ketamine therapy for depression, if those things don't get somebody well, it's like, well, what do? You have psychotherapy, you have psychoanalysis. But we need new ways to treat depression. And so psychedelics were a class of chemicals that used to be studied. And then when they were made all illegal, they couldn't study them anymore. I think that's the way I think about it. So there's a lot of catching up to do of understanding them and how they affect our brains. And there may be some useful mechanisms of action to treat the depression in some patients. But I would not recommend people take any of those substances for depression until they work with somebody who really knows about it, because some people can have side effects where it can really backfire and make them worse. So,
okay. Yeah. And that was from an anonymous patient.
Oh, okay. Yes.
Mm-hmm. All right. Last question. All right. How do you keep your emotions in check when you're talking to a patient?
That's a really good question. A lot of it happens before I sit down with the patient. I have to keep my inner game in check, meaning my routines and my energy levels need to be top notch coming into work. So I'll make sure I get enough sleep. I make sure that I get enough exercise, and sometimes I really have to be artful to curate, the time or within your schedule to do the things that you need to do for your mental health. I'd like to, meet up with friends and get time off the field, as I like to say, to connect with people. Relationships are really important. Getting along with your spouse is really important. Like not going to bed angry, that whole thing, So a lot of it has to do with having my mind right before I get into the session. In the session, in the beginning of my career, I used to kind of hold back emotionally and have some more distance between me and what was going on with the patient. But over time, as you kind of grow into a older, wiser man, hopefully, I like to follow my emotions, so I'm not bottling them up. So, for example, if someone says something to me that's really sad in an interview, when I'm interviewing somebody, I might tear up, and I might put my pen down and wipe a tear away and say, "Wow, that was very profoundly sad." In the beginning of my career, I probably wouldn't do that as much, and I think it kind of wrecked me when I got home. But now, when I do it with patients, it's like you're exercising your emotional engine, and by doing that, I don't take it home as much. And then I think there's a lot of value for a patient seeing that what they're telling another human being has impact, and validates their experience. So go back to your question is, how do I keep my emotions in check? Sometimes it's simply by exercising the emotions. in a professional way, not like I'm, wailing on the ground here. You know what I mean?
Thank you for sharing. And also that was from Cole H from Arizona. So.
Okay. Well, there you go, Cole H. If you ever come to see me, I will probably cry in the interview because I'm exercising my emotions to validate yours. Okay. All right. See you. The next questions from the waiting room. Great.
All right.
Great question.
Bye.
Bye-bye.